Board Member Gay, are you the only?
Myself and board member Harper.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I didn't see her.
I
Is
didn't either.
Kanika? Did she join us?
She is
Yes,
here.
Oh, good. Good. Kanika and I will be graduating from the Citizen Academy Thursday.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
very excited.
Kanika, I'm just
12
happy
weeks?
to have my Thursdays back again.
Oh, yes, it does get late. It gets late. Those are some long days.
So
It
what was your
was.
favorite part of the Citizens Academy, you all? What did you all like the most?
So what did you say?
What did you all like the most about the Citizens Academy? What was your highlight of the class?
You know, I was amazed that we have so many officers that have such long tenure with the city of St. Louis. And there are so many different types of activities that they are engaged in. So I found it to be very interesting. I really appreciated being able to meet the police officers.
I would
What
agree
did you
with
think?
that, along with I think the hands-on aspect of it, putting us in certain situations and roles so we can, see through their eyes in moments of crisis and things of that nature was the highlight for me.
So I take it that means you all got to participate in the shooting simulator?
Yes. Yes.
You know, that's interesting. I did miss that class. I understand it was very good. I've never held a firearm. And in the back of my head, and my brother-in-law, he's deceased, but he's a retired fireman, one of the first African-American firefighters that was hired in Cincinnati. I mean, he just had a whole artillery. So I always felt if I needed to have a firearm, I just would go to their house and get one. But I don't even know the first thing about using one.
Well, it
Not good.
definitely was an experience. That class was definitely an experience to remember. And like I said, just being in those roles and situations with milliseconds to react, it definitely gives you a whole new perspective on what they go through.
I was trying to reach Reverend Gray. We tried earlier today. And I just tried again. I've not spoken to him. But I was certainly hoping that he would be on the meeting this evening.
Oh. I did have a question about, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding policies and procedures correctly. So I know that in October of 22, they adopted procedural rules in terms of meetings, officers, terms, things like that. I know we had a so recommendations that were adopted as part of our policies and procedures in January of 24. And there was a line on revoking the rules and procedures from 2022. However, I just wanted to make sure because the new policies and procedures say nothing at this point with regards to how we conduct meetings, the officers and the terms. It's more so focused on the procedures of processing complaints. And so I do wonder if that puts us in a gray area in terms of how we dictate quorum.
Very good point, because I was looking for that earlier regarding if we did not have a quorum, did the procedures speak to the board having the capability to follow up and email members to obtain a vote? But that was not in the procedures either.
That's
I think
actually
it's-
state law. You know, we have to follow the Missouri Sunshine Law, so that would, you know, not be what we would be doing. But I'll give you your quorum is 5, I believe, but I'll give you a preview of things to come since we haven't really gotten started. Board Bill 122, I can't think of the ordinance number, passed. And we're going to be sending out, it's going to require a review and posting of board rules. And my office is going to be sending something out about that, and, you know, maybe a little template to get everybody thinking about it. So that hasn't gone out yet, but perfect opportunity to revisit.
May I add to Barbara that I think Board Member Gay is referencing 2 separate documents.
Yeah, I believe
One-
that.
One being the board rules that govern the conduct of the board's business. The other one governing the policies and procedures that he correctly notes as being one primarily devoted to processing complaints that are filed.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if you recall, Barb, the Executive Order 79 spoke to the development of those, and I think that you and I had taken a look at some modifications to the board rules that set out the conduct of business, including the voting on new officers and terms and that sort of thing. But I don't know that the draft that we talked about was ever actually approved by the attorney, the city attorney. I don't know if that we ever got that point. So I was wondering then, since I'm not sure if there was an actual revocation of those board rules that were in place. There was a revocation of the prior policies and procedures because a determination was made that the identified officers had not consulted on them. So that is what I guess is now posted, the policies and procedures that Nicole facilitated getting all of the consults with the mentioned officers. And the only thing that was left with respect to the ones that the board adopted was the approval by the Director of Public Safety, which to my knowledge never occurred.
Yeah, I concur with that. I don't have that
Yeah.
ever happening.
So whether it's appropriate or not, we have patterned our protocols after those procedures that are outlined in that last policies and procedures that was adopted by the board in January.
Is that January of which year?
24.
24.
24.
Okay.
24, right.
It's like, all right.
Otherwise, you would have weighed in, Commissioner. Yeah.
No, let's see, in 24, I was still at the Community Development Administration office, probably trying to address brownfield contracts, which was a really interesting experience. I do have a text message from Reverend Gray, and regrettably, he has a family emergency, and he will not be able to join our meeting. How would you like to proceed?
And this time I'm very thinking you're not going to have a quorum to, to do any business. It's 17 minutes you've given everyone.
Tonight, we were expecting that there will be a presentation about the procedures for the DFOB to receive complaints. We also have two of our investigators on hand to talk about a couple of cases. And in an earlier conversation in the office, we thought, well, we could record, of course, the meeting is recorded, but these presentations could be available for board members who are not at this meeting now. But what is your pleasure? Do you want to hear the presentations, or do you want to reconvene at another time?
Who are you asking?
Those who are present.
Firstly, I would say for the sake of, I think, moving the DFOB's work overall forward, it's not a motion, we're not calling to order, we can't approve anything today. But if it is a public presentation, I would like to hear it.
Okay. Kanika, Barbara, what is your pleasure?
I'm in agreement with that. To further the agenda, especially if it's recorded, then we can move along.
Okay, very good.
I mean, I always think if you don't have a quorum, you should, reschedule. But I mean, it's sort of because you can't really conduct any business at all. But I guess you're looking at this as sort of a series of announcements, or.
Well, actually, Ruby will present the procedures as they are related to various ordinances. And then our investigators will provide you an example of a couple of the complaints that they have received related to detention facilities. So, Ruby, do you want to proceed? Is that
Sure.
okay, Barbara?
And Barbara, for clarification, what we wanted to do initially was to simply review excerpts from the ordinances that specifically relate to complaints, the investigation of the complaints, the DFOB's authority, as well as that of the commissioner and the investigators. And so it is publicly available information. We just wanted to, in anticipation of the board being able to review completed investigations, we thought we would just kind of start with our references and the authorities within the ordinance. And then the examples that the commissioner mentions that the investigators will provide, there will be no personal identifiable information. They're actually complaints that are pending within the office, but have not been completed. So this was our way of honoring the board members who completed their training, when, as I've said, that is a mandate within the ordinance. They have done that. We now have 5 members constituting a quorum who have completed that training. So we wanted to keep them engaged. And so we thought that at least a review of the applicable references within the ordinance might be a good place to start. Does that help, and is that okay with you?
Yeah, I think because that's all publicly available and you're just citing the ordinances for ease of reference, I think that should be totally fine.
Okay. All right, and there are no action items associated with the presentation. So with that, and Barbara, if at any point you have some discomfort about anything, please just yell out. Okay, Oswald, you want to bring up the PowerPoint, and I'll try and go through it as fast as possible and as painless as possible.
Give me 1 second.
That is the PowerPoint that says Introduction to Detention Facilities Oversight Board Complaint Presentations.
Yeah, it's loading.
Oh, it's loading?
Yep, give me 1 second.
Oh, okay.
We do have one person who has been recommended for DFOB, and we are in touch. We've sent an email to the mayor's new staff member who is responsible for civic boards and commissions. So you'll be hearing more about that soon.
Okay. That is the Introduction to Detention Facilities Oversight Board. Can we go to the first 3 pages that are on one slide? Is that as large as it gets, Antoine?
I try and make it larger. I think so. Is it small? Because it's large on my screen.
Go up to
It comes
display
up
settings at the top.
Yeah, it comes up larger for us. I'm not sure.
And swap or duplicate. There we go.
There you go.
That's good.
That's better. Okay, so as an initial reference point, I wanted to acknowledge the work of the Corrections Task Force that preceded the adoption of the various legislative enactments. That was a task force that was appointed by the former Mayor Lyda Crewson after an uprising that occurred at the CJC on February 6, 2021. That task force was composed of 9 members and was chaired by Reverend Darrell Gray, and Pamela Walker served as vice chair. I just mentioned the 2 of them because they happen to have also have been appointed to the original board for the DFOB. That task force identified 3 major CJC areas of study, and I've listed them as concerns and complaints regarding food, water, temperature, and clothing. There was a concern about how slow the cases were moving through the 22nd Judicial Circuit. And this was all also associated with COVID, because COVID was raging during this time as well. And that second area of study was focused on measures that would address the isolation and the uncertainty that was resulting from stopping the court cases due to the pandemic. The third area of focus for the task force was the building and equipment needs of CJC, which was about 20 years old at the time. And so the key urgent recommendation that came out of this study, and there were several, but I highlighted this one specifically because it happened. And that recommendation was for the Board of Aldermen to establish an ordinance creating a corrections oversight board. And we have in our office that complete corrections task force report. So any board members that are interested in receiving them, we will happily give them to you. I think that was very important work that these volunteers did, and I certainly wanted to recognize them as the precursor to the original ordinance that was adopted, establishing DFOB, which also is comprised of 9 city residents and whose purposes were to serve as an advisory body to the mayor, the commissioner of corrections, the director of public safety with regard to detention facility operations, the conditions of detention, corrections policies that is authorized to receive and investigate the complaints of alleged corrections misconduct and detention incidents. And the work of the board is to make the findings and recommendations based on investigative completed reports, including recommendations regarding those policies and procedures, employee professional development, and employee disciplinary action. And so following 71430, because the work has been evolutionary, there was the enactment of Ordinance 71647, which reconstituted the DFOB and provided staff support for the COB board and provided the coordination and staff support for the DFOB. 71647 also established the Division of Civilian Oversight within the Department of Public Safety. Reverend Gray would probably tell you that was not their recommendation. The task force anticipated that the agency set up to oversee the detention facilities would be independent. However, we are a division under the Department of Public Safety. And that ordinance became effective in March of 2023. Then there was a subsequent ordinance, 71749, that repealed 71430 and amended 71647. And so we refer to both 71647 and 71749 as our governing ordinances currently. Now, during the excerpts, and that's why you can go to the next slide, you will see some ... dots. And those ... dots more often than not relate to the COB and police investigations. I have left them out for the sake of brevity, as well as to keep the focus on the DFOB, because we know that there will be some changes in terms of what the division may be able to do as it relates to the investigations of police misconduct. And so okay. The next reference is in relation to the potential interference. I think that we overlooked something that was on the other page, but we are going to take a look specifically at the provision that deals with non-interference in terms of our investigations. That's okay. You can go ahead. And there was some mention of that last amendment 71749 giving the authority of DFOB to hire independent counsel, and the hiring would have to be a part of the division's budget. So another focus is to make clear that the Commissioner of Civilian Oversight has the authority to direct and supervise the civilian oversight investigators and the staff. So that is within the commissioner's purview. And she also has the authority to initiate professional standard inquiries. And they, of course, would be subject to the rules and regulations of the Department of Personnel and the Civil Service Commission, where disciplinary action against employees of the Corrections Division might be a consideration. I also wanted to point out the significance and importance of the Division of Civilian Oversight having access to any records prepared for disciplinary purposes, except those that are contingent upon the Civil Service Commission and passing of their rules and regulations. And I think the commission did in fact pass some rules that allowed us meaning the division, to proceed with obtaining certain records that were not otherwise prohibited. And so the investigative functions are that, under the ordinances, the division cannot dismiss or deny any complaint, without first conducting what's known as a reasonable inquiry. And that discretion is granted to the commissioner and the civilian oversight investigators. However, the ordinance identifies certain events or occurrences that are automatically subjected to professional standards inquiry. And those are whenever the ... referred to the police. But here we're focused on corrections personnel. And so whenever a correction official discharges a firearm or other uses of force that lead or contribute to serious injury or death of any person, as well as the death of any person from any potential cause in a detention facility, the death of any person, and that's mentioned twice. It looks like, Answar, you may not have gotten the final version up, but we'll proceed on with this one. And no, go back, please. Go back to 6. I wanted to just highlight the broad authority that the commissioner, investigators, and civilian oversight staff has to examine and evaluate corrections policies, procedures, and operations, including incidents in the public interest and for purposes of recommending any improvements and reforms. And again, there's a provision that highlights the access to information that the board and investigators are supposed to have, with the exception of any records or information that are prohibited by federal or state law. This provision also granted the commissioner subpoena power. And while I believe Barb has advised us that the amendment to the state law probably does not, probably kind of superseded the subpoena power as it relates to the investigation of allegations of police misconduct. And I think it remains to be seen whether or not that subpoena power might still exist when it comes to the investigation of DFOB complaints. And so the ordinance has always been pretty clear that the oversight board has the authority to obtain access to records and documents, and they are more specifically outlined in Section 8, subsection C. And I did include that going forward. So can we go to the next slide, please? It made a point that not only does the commissioner and the division investigators have the right to have access to these records and information, the agencies are supposed to even assist us in obtaining access to the records. And that leads us to this provision regarding non-interference. No administrative or disciplinary activity of the Division of Civilian Oversight, including the activities of COB or DFOB, shall interfere with any criminal investigation or civil investigation. I'm not sure if that's ever been an agenda item for DFOB, but I know that the COB has visited it, and I believe one of the investigators that are going to give you an example of an actual complaint, a request for stay was an issue. And so there was an amendment by the board that attempted to clarify or at least give us some insight into the reasons for the request for the stays. And that amendment required the requesting agency to appear before both boards, you know, whichever complaint was pending before which board, in order to explain why the action, the complaint has been requested to be placed in suspension or stayed, and to determine whether or not whatever the conflict was, whatever the rationale was, is in fact continuing. So we do have that, and hopefully the DFOB will be able to receive in writing those reports from the requesting agencies when they've asked us to stop our investigation for whatever reason. So Section 8 then gives very specific kinds of records that the division has the authority to receive. And again, we have to always be mindful of certain exceptions that are always going to be prohibited, either by federal or state law, when we're requesting information that's required to complete investigations of the complaints. And so just to read through a few of the examples that the Board of Aldermen very specifically and intentionally laid out, they are records of all complaints, detention incidents, corrections of professional misconduct that is important to determine whether or not there's some kind of pattern in practice by certain officials. And our governmental analyst is tracking that kind of information when we get the complaints, and we're able to identify any allegations against specific corrections personnel. We are to receive by ordinance any data that is constituting or related to the complainants. Again, the incidents, patterns, or practice of misconduct, and other matters. Next slide, Aswa. the policy directives, detention facility conditions, operations and maintenance, pretty much everything that's going to be related to that complaint, the ordinance authorizes the commissioner, the investigators, the DFOB board to have access to. And interviews with complainants, witnesses, all of these kinds of activities that are going to be important to doing independent, thorough investigations. And unless and until that changes, our understanding is that DFOB has not been limited by any of the changes in the state statutes that touch and concern allegations of police misconduct. And so that concludes that portion of my presentation. Are there any questions, or Madam Commissioner, would you like for us to proceed with the the investigators' presentations before we open it up to questions? Or shall we ask for questions now? Any questions members might have as it relates to the ordinances and their authority? Did the commissioner hear me?
I did hear you. You know
Oh,
what
okay.
I'm thinking, Ruby, is I would like to see this document on our website, because I do believe there needs to be more communication about our responsibility, and it is situated within a legal framework, the alderperson's ordinances, because we have experience hesitation in providing documents. And in one instance in particular, we were told that this official would not give us any materials. We could not access any of those reports. So I just think this is a good summary, but it would also be helpful, I think, in putting it on our website, so it's available for the public to view as well.
Well, and I would ask that Barbara Burke could weigh in on this. As I indicated, it is excerpts.
I'm not going to be able to weigh in any legal opinion about how to interpret these ordinances in an open public meeting.
Oh, that
I'm sorry.
wasn't my question,
Oh, I'm
Barbara.
sorry, Ruby.
I wasn't asking for a legal opinion. I was asking for a comment on the fact that this document is excerpted from the actual ordinances that are referenced. The full ordinances are referenced in the website. And so sometimes I just feel a little bit cautious when when we're looking at specific excerpts of a legal document. So
I agree with you, because they often take an entire comprehensive reading in order to interpret. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and this was just a brief kind of overview specifically for our board members, but I think that members of the public, they have access to the full ordinance. And that's what I was asking. That's not exactly a legal opinion, but I just wanted you to weigh in terms of the commissioner's question about it. I don't personally have a problem with putting it up there, Commissioner Mylan, if you think it's helpful, but that's always a consideration when things are kind of taken from a whole.
Yes, many
and
provisions hinge on other provisions and so forth.
Right, right, because I've taken out the references to the police department, and so it could very easily lead to more confusion than clarification. I think it's just an observation, though.
Okay, your point's well taken. Reddit and Cora, Are there any questions that anyone has for Ruby? Okay. Reddit and Cora, are you ready to present?
Yes, I am. Antoine,
Yeah, give me a second.
okay.
And then I'll be ready when she's done.
That's correct. Okay. My name is legal investigator Cora Baker. I'm here at the Detention Facilities Oversight Board. And today I present to you the processing of the DFOB Joint Civilian Complaint Forms. These are forms that I received through the mail on the website, from the website for the JCCF complaints form. So my first complaint form, and the complaint form is for the St. Louis City detention facilities, as well as the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. The complaint types: St. Louis City Detention Facility, City of Justice Center. Complaints against the Division of Corrections, City Justice Center. Complaint case 1. This is an open case, so there's no names, but to this case, I have 36 detainees that's on the same case with the same complaint. The harsh treatment of the inmates struggling to adapt to the City Justice Center, which includes issues like starvation, denial of medical attention, and inadequate recreational activities, creates an unhealthy situation. The ongoing crisis regarding detainees being held in the admission area. That's the admission area on the second floor where they're brought up from the police, the intake, first floor intake, the police department, and brought into corrections on the second floor. And they're placed in a holding tank until they're processed in. And they're being placed in these holding tanks for extended periods, sometimes weeks, without access to water, toilet. Is deeply concerning, because by state and federal law, any cell that's occupied by a detainee must have running water, light, and bedding. No one should be sleeping on the floor. And that's by state and federal ACA standards. Allegations and claim or assertions that someone has done for something illegal or wrong. So in this complaint, the 36 detainees that filed this complaint, they filed under these terms: the facts: excessive use of force, discourtesy and uncivil treatment, verbal or physical harassment, failure to investigate, abuse of authority, medical treatment, failure to intervene or report. These are the complaints that this is what the alleged complaint is for the 36 detainees to this report. Okay, Antoine. Now, this part of this is one of the complaints that we also receive over here at the Civilian Oversight Board. But we do not investigate employers base grievances. The city of St. Louis have a grievance procedure. There is an internal grievance process and an external process. The EEOC policy and complaint procedure document and EEO policy and complaint form are on the City of St. Louis website, and that is Admin Regulations 103. I added this to my slide because we get numerous complaints from different departments, and it's normally city employees and city employment. So they have the City of St. Louis have a grievance process, and they have to follow that grievance process. We do not engage in those complaints. Okay, methodology. Here it would be consistent with the ordinance 71547, section 1 of complaints. This is what I'm requiring, or this is what our division for DFOB requires. Provide notice to the City Justice Center of the complaint. That's what I do. Once I receive the complaint, the ordinance, I have 48 hours to share that complaint with the City Justice Center. Request a copy of the arrest register. That's what I need. Booking information in the jail management system, which is the program they have, IJMS systems report. I need the post assignment. That's the post report, which gives who was the supervisor, who is the officer that worked that area where the complaint originated from. Listing of detainees in a mission area present. Those are the detainees that was present during the time this letter was dated. Shift commander on duty. That's the shift commander. That's who runs the whole facility operations. That means every floor of the building. They should have some knowledge and making rounds to assure that those detainees are cared for correctly. Lieutenants assigned to the second floor area. Normally that's the intake floor, the second floor. And that's basically a lieutenant is normally assigned to that floor, or in some instance, you might have a captain, correctional shift commander assigned to that floor, but it's always a higher supervision than the officers assigned to that second floor area, our intake area. I should receive a security round sheet. That's a sheet that's made available. It's a daily sheet that has the recordings of the time you visually and made sure that detainee was alert and secure. Interview all detainees of this complaint. That's what I have to do. The 36 that allege the same complaint will be interviewed. Interview any witnesses. If they have any witnesses in their complaint that they verified on their complaint, I will interview them. interview the correctional staff related to this complaint. That means I will have to interview the correctional staff that engaged or was assigned to this area before doing the process of these complaints being processed. Admitted doing that. And then I provide a summary. Once I gather all of that information, I receive all that information, I provide a summary of findings to the Department of Public Safety. Then we will forward the whole report to the board, the DFOB board, for decision. We'll make our recommendations before we provide the DFOB board members of our findings and what we suggest, and then they'll make the approval. Either they're gonna accept it or sustain it or unsustain it of that report. That will complete my process as dealing with the DFOB, JCCF, the Joint Complaint Correction forms that we receive in our office. Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Is that a typo? May I ask the ordinance number? Is it 71749?
Yes, it is a typo. Thanks for recognizing, Barb.
Oh, sure.
Actually, it's not a typo
No.
because it's 71647 as amended by 71749. So
Gotcha.
the combination of the use of both of them constitute our governing ordinances currently.
But the ordinance should identify 71647. And it's listed there as 71547.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Cora.
Thank
Read it.
you.
Okay, Swat. I'll wait for you to pull it up. All right. Were you, Answar, were you able to get that notice I sent you? Can everybody hear me?
This is all I got. Right here.
Yes.
Okay, I thought I had sent the notice over because it was, you know, I didn't have it in my PowerPoint when I put it together. That's okay. I'll just describe it to the board members. Good afternoon, board members. I'm Investigator Reddit Hudson, and the case that I'm going to be presenting to you is a good one, I think, for our purposes here tonight, for a number of reasons, not the least of which, if you remember some of the things that Ruby highlighted in the ordinance authorizing your activities and describing your powers relative to access and the requirements for you to be able to receive information and for us to be able to do the work that we do are all kind of contained somewhere in this case. So I'm going to walk through it step by step. And one of the things that is unique about this case, one of the powers that you may remember Ruby describing to you that's granted to the commissioner through the ordinance is that the commissioner can initiate a complaint. This is, in fact, a commissioner-initiated complaint. The redactions are there because it is still currently under criminal investigation. To our knowledge, a stay was issued to us relative to the non-interference that Ruby discussed with you earlier. I'll read off the language of the stays when I get to the end of my presentation. So I'll walk you through how we go when we get something. And the other thing I want to tell you about this case is that it started off initially as the complaint that you see here, but ultimately became one of the death investigations that I'm currently conducting. So I'll start walking through it. This is the complaint. I'll read it out. The detainee is currently being held in the medical unit of the St. Louis City Justice Center. It was reported to the Division of Civilian Oversight that John Doe is unable to manage his basic care for himself. That would include eating, bathing, all manners of self-care. It was also reported that the current medical staff has advised that they do not have enough staff to provide for his daily feeding needs. Additionally, it was reported that the medical staff has advised the Division of Corrections to handle his day-to-day feedings. The same reporting has advised that the Division of Corrections staff has not taken responsibility for his feedings. It is further reported that the visual appearance and health of the detainee has drastically declined since his initial incarceration, January 10th, 2023. Next slide.
May I ask, is there a stay order regarding this matter right now?
Yeah, I think so. That's
So,
why we redacted everything.
and I didn't have anything to do with that redaction. I mean, I don't know if you want to proceed with this particular example, if there's a stay order that is, active
Okay.
right now.
Well, then I'll take direction from Commissioner Mylan.
As I understand a stay, the stay prohibits us from investigating. But I don't believe the stay would prohibit us from reporting out this particular case.
I agree, Commissioner.
And I am not in a position to offer you legal advice during this open public meeting. I would just suggest if there's a stay that we, table that, but that is just my suggestion.
Okay, instead of going through each part of the presentation, Reddit, can you summarize
Yeah,
the
sure.
steps that you would like to take when the stay is lifted?
Oh, absolutely. But let me say something too, because that complaint that I just read out to you all, the notice went out to the CJC from our office. The required notice went out on June 13th. 2 months later, this particular inmate was deceased, and we had not gained access to interview him, to check his condition, or any of the things that were requested in the initial notice. So once it became a death investigation, and Swore, you can go all the way to which slide? Just advance the slides and I'll tell you which one to go to. Stop. Yeah. So once it became a death investigation, then our work was automatically triggered. Remember, in the ordinance, there are certain incidents that automatically trigger an investigation by the Division of Oversight, and this is one of them. So to begin any fair, thorough, impartial investigation, there's a lot of information that we would require. I think, and Barb, you can even weigh in on this, originally in the ordinance, it was a power that we had as investigators that we were supposed to be present at the scenes. The way I read
I cannot weigh in on this because I can't, for some interpretation of the ordinance in an open public meeting, and I had no notice of.
I got you. Suffice it to say, board members, we were not at the scene, and what I would need, for example, would be first to identify the, go back one slide, Answar, just so we can see some of the policies that, I'm sorry. Yeah, you'll see all the way down to policy 4.2.4 and up from that were the initial policies and responses generated from the initial complaint when we just heard that the guy was gravely ill and wanted to get over there. So there was going to be some interviews, evidence gathering, review of medical intake and assessment documents, policies relative to incident reports, inmates with disabilities, classification, health services, administrative treatment. Now, Everything under that, and these are in no particular order of priority, they are just identified policies that could potentially be relevant given the nature of the incident and the kind of investigation we want to conduct, would be contained in all the subsequent policies that you see listed here, to include the last one, the U.S. Constitution and the 8th Amendment, barring cruel and unusual punishment. But you have inmate death, you got health examinations, medical screening, emergency medical response policy, inmate custody records, and some other ones. Okay, you can go on to the next slide, Antoine. So, to investigate the death of this individual, I first would need to establish the date and time of his death, and then I would need a whole list of things. The incident report, the FIU report. I have that highlighted, board members, in yellow, because it's critical given the fact that historically, we haven't had the kind of access that's been described in the ordinance, but the FIU, which is the Force Investigation Unit of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, has had that access. They are the responders on deaths inside the jails. They do the reports. So in order for me, a person who has been limited relative to my access to records, the physical structure of the building, the scene, witnesses, and everything else, to get that report. It is a starting point for me that would allow me to at least see what evidence they collected, what evidence they analyzed and assessed, any conclusions that they were drawing, and not that I'm bound by their report, but it would at least be a foundation for me to begin, again, a thorough, substantive investigation. And then the list is fairly exhaustive from there. I might not read them all, but inmate history, records, custody, case file, informal resolution requests, any phone calls he made, any mail, his activity logs, the shift supervisor and unit supervisor's summary of the incident, highlighted facility, camera, video, and audio footage, scene survey, medical logs, medical reports. You can go on to the next one, Ansoir. The next slide. But you get the idea. Death in Custody Reporting Act, any statements from his cellmates, any other inmate witness statements, statements from released inmates who may have been present during the time that the incident occurred but have been since released, corrections officer statements, corrections investigators statements, highlighted medical staff witness statements, medical examiner statement, and again, FIU investigators, the actual responders to the scene who got to see and touch and talk to and evaluate their statements, would be the kinds of things that would guide my investigation, part of my investigative plan. The next steps, once those things were collected, would be my analysis of them, the facts and evidence, and my conclusions, and then recommendations. As has been pointed out, a stay has been issued in this case. I know that, I think the commissioner can speak to any progress that we are currently experiencing under the new leadership over there relative to access. I think there's some on the horizon. I'll leave that to the commissioner to speak to if she wants to this evening. But the letters of the stays are here. And just to give you an example, one is very brief. I'll just read the one. We got one from then Director Charles Coyle of Public Safety, and current police chief. He's writing to notify us that the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department is conducting a criminal investigation concerning the above referenced incident. Activities of the Division of Civilian Oversight and/or the Detention Oversight Board will interfere with the ongoing criminal investigation. Please stay all inquiries and investigations related to this investigation until the criminal investigation is complete. Let me say this, too, as I conclude. One of the challenges I think you all are going to face as a board is something that's beyond anybody's control, really, and that's just the nature of these facilities. It's a jail, right? And so I don't I've lived in St. Louis all my life. I can remember the Medium Security Institute, which we call the Workhouse, the Justice Center. I can't really remember a time in the history of either of those facilities. And I don't know if anybody else can identify a time period greater than a week or two, maybe a month in the multi-decades histories of those places where there wasn't some pending litigation or some pending investigation. Just because of the nature of the institutions, there's likely to always be some ongoing or potential litigation or investigation. So the non-interference element may be, I don't want to say ever present, but regularly inhibited our ability to really do thorough and complete investigations as envisioned by the access and powers described in the ordinance.
Thank you, Reddit. Thank you, Cora. Are there any questions or comments?
I would just like to clarify the timeline in which a complaint is made, an investigator is assigned, and the DFOB is notified of a complaint in process, a complaint being investigated.
In Reddit's report, he did identify by ordinance, once we get the complaint, we have to respond. And I believe that time period, I don't have it in front of me, is it 48?
48
days?
hours.
48 hours. 48 hours. And so that response is we provide in writing an acknowledgement letter of receiving the complaint. Did I answer your question?
Yes, that's between the DCO and others, but in terms of the DCO informing DFOB, what is that timeline?
If I may, and we do have the policies and procedures as a part of my PowerPoint, but for the sake of brevity, I just kind of skipped over that. And we have examples of the joint form that complainants fill out. But in those policies and procedures, I believe there's a 90-day period that's indicated, unless there's some extenuating circumstances, where we are to complete the investigations and have them presented to the DFOB. To my knowledge, there is no ordinance requiring that the DFOB be notified when we receive complaints. But I think the commissioner and the requirement of annual reports that Mrs. Badesi prepares, she prepares quarterly and annual reports that gives the board some information about the types of complaints we receive, the dates they're received, and various other data points. I think that is probably why the ordinance requires that those reports be done. They're designated as accountability reports. And I think the various nuances, I'll say, associated with the investigators being able to complete the reports, and much of it does center around the lack of access to the detainees, as well as a lack of access to the records. And some of that has to do with the ability of the board members to complete the requirements for orientation and training, as well as the vacancies that have occurred. So there are any number of reasons why we've not been able to fulfill even those timelines that are reported in our own policies and procedures. But I'll be happy to ask Answa to go back to those so at least you can see the areas that the policy does cover, or we can certainly make sure that each board member gets a copy of what is pending. And I believe the commissioner may have some suggested modifications to the existing policies and procedures at some point, as well as trying to fulfill that final requirement of approval by the current Director of Public Safety.
I do think there needs to be a conversation. One of those conversations needs to happen. I could contact Director Dace and have this conversation with Director Dace. But I think the other part of it is our board having a discussion that is focused on the barrier of not getting requested information. I find it very interesting that we have this challenge. And I'm not sure what to attribute the challenge to, except in one situation, to my surprise. This is a public official with a very high priority position who adamantly stated he would not give us any reports, that any of his reports that are available, we would have to obtain them from the police department, but he would not give us any reports. So, but I do think it's a discussion point that I think the board needs to have in terms of accessing information. Barbara, you look like you want to say something.
Oh, no, I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Special thanks to Cora and Reddit and also Ruby on your presentations. This is the first opportunity for two of our investigators to provide the presentation. So we will be following up. Is there anything else that you wish to discuss or have questions at this time?
Not for myself, but I will follow up. So I would like to have discussions on what we can do to create less barriers to both information as well as detainees.
Thank you, Usman. We need that support. Any other questions or comments? Well, we appreciate your time this evening. And it is our hope and expectation that we will be able to have a full board at our next meeting. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.